What's up, guys? Ryan Murphy here, back with another review, this time of Thor. I like that I'm able to just sort of click on the button and then click off, and then I'll just upload it. So I know this doesn't look the best. Like I've said before, I'm a little embarrassed because of the low video quality, but as long as that's the case, I'm just gonna sort of just go very simple with it, just click and upload. There's a lot less work there. So, but anyway, again, if you haven't seen the first three videos I've done on the first three Marvel movies, Marvel Studios movies, these are sort of supposed to be more in-depth reviews because I'm a sort of a student of film structure. I love analyzing film structure, and I really want to get at the heart of a movie. And if it's good, why? If it's bad, why? What's the story they're trying to tell? How do they try and tell that story? And do they do a good job along the way? And where could they have done better? That's one thing I like to make a point of, is how they could have done better, which not a lot of reviews do. I like to sort of imagine an alternate universe where I was an associate producer on the movie and could make suggestions, and the film might have been a little bit better. But nevertheless, let's get down to brass tactics with Thor. Thor, I think, is a film that was reasonably well received. I think the critics didn't necessarily respond to it the best, but I don't hear a lot of complaints. I mean, it's not as good as, not as well received as the Avengers, we'll say, but I've always liked it. And I think the most pertinent flaw we all kind of know, or I think a lot of people agreed on, it seemed at the time that was the thing that everyone was complaining about. We'll get to that in a minute. But first, like I always do, what's the A and the C? When you're dealing with films, you always have to look at the A and the C. What's the story they're trying to tell? The B is how they get there and how they do it. And that's where they can really fail. That's where they fail more often than most. Sometimes the A and the C is just a bad idea to begin with. So the way to make the film better is just to not do it. Do a different film. But the A and C of Thor is pretty basic. It's Thor being banished to Earth and learning to be a better person. Kind of similar to the whole story of Iron Man. It's similar to the story of Doctor Strange. A lot of the Marvel movies that say have similar stories. That's okay. This is very true to the comics. Obviously, this is right out of the comics. This is how Thor, came to Earth by picking a fight with the Frost Giants. So we open up. I like the fact that we open up on Earth, because if we just open up on Asgard, then it's like, when we get to Earth, it's like, oh, okay, so this has humans in it and stuff. That's not what does, the Earth thing right away grounds it. We know that we're going to eventually come back to this scene on Earth, so I like that aspect of it. First thing you have to say about this film is that it's extremely well cast. I mean, I remember when they were casting the part, I was like, who are they going to get to play Thor? And people throw out these dumb ideas like Brad Pitt or whatever, but no, they knocked it out of the park. Tom Hiddleston as Loki. The production design, the costume design by Bo Welch and Alexandra Byrne, just top notch, great stuff, and it just sort of blows you away. The musical score, like I've said before, I think the musical scores of Marvel Studios are great. Iron Man was great. The Incredible Hulk was great. Iron Man 2 was the first weak point. I didn't mention that in my Iron Man 2 review, but they got rid of Ramin Djawadi's score, and they replaced it with a new one by John Debney that's completely unremarkable. And John Debney did The Passion of the Christ. I mean, this is a talented composer, but never mind. I think the music for Thor is terrific. It's by Patrick Doyle, who does all of Kenneth Branagh's films, and it's kind of basic. Well, we're introduced to Thor. He's a hothead. He's not ready to be king. He just can't wait to be king. But he picks a fight, goes the Frost Giant realm, causes a lot of damage, and is banished. Okay, not rocket science. The first act, where I think the film. Actually, I think it's not even until the third act that I think the film could have really done better, because the second act is basically him being found by Jane Foster. Oh no, an aspect of the film that never gets talked about, and you might call me nitpicky. I personally don't think this is nitpicking at all. I think this is actually pretty important, and something that I don't think gets talked about is the stupid language factor. Okay, I cannot stand this about films. Look at my hair. Oh, I got it. Okay, so when aliens come to Earth and they just speak English like nothing, like that's for me a huge factor for Superman 2. Like it's idiotic. Like he comes to, like, the first thing that happens is they come to the moon and they speak to a man who's speaking, by the way, in his helmet, which, if you don't know how this works, he speaks into a microphone, which then turns the sound into electricity, which goes to the other microphone. That's the only person who's hearing what he's saying in that helmet. you know they're not going to, but and then they're immediately asked the question in English. He responds in English. They understand. They think Houston is the name of the planet. Stupid movie. overrated movie. Back to Thor. He comes to Earth. Now, even if Thor can speak English, it's not out of the realm, just say Thor can't speak English. Wonder Woman handled this very well. Wonder Woman said, she meets Steve Trevor, and I think maybe the first words out of her mouth are "You're a man," so she is kind of speaking English, but not to the extent that okay, maybe it is just as bad. But she actually says we speak hundreds of languages. That's how we speak English. She could have I don't know. She could have read his name tag or something. I'd have to watch the movie again. You can let me know in the comments. But here, he is literally the first words out of his mouth. He's calling for his hammer in English, and she's like, "Yeah, we can tell you're hammered. It's pretty obvious." And then he actually says, "What realm is this?" He's saying, "What realm is this?" in English, and then yeah, and then he says, "Oh no, this is Earth." Well, now that line got cut from the movie, but it's just ridiculous. I hate it. Can't stand it. It's something I don't know why filmmakers actually let this slide. It's not nitpicking in my mind. It's like no, that's a significant factor. They're not aliens are not just gonna speak English. Sorry, people speak different languages in this universe, but no, he encounters Jane Foster, and then she takes him to they have a couple of little shenanigans, and she takes him to the crash site, and he has an action scene at the crash site, and this is kind of a lot of screen time just to get him to the hammer, right? Which he's going to pick up and realize, or which he's going to try and pick up and realize he can't. And so it's a lot of screen time just to say, well, here's the hammer, you can't pick it up. I think he would have known that already because he was banished, but it doesn't feel out of place. I'm not actually complaining about it because it's an action movie. If you were to remove all that and then just have him deposited on Earth, meets Jane Foster, Loki comes down, says, "Hey, father's dead," and that's the end of Act Two, and it wouldn't work very well. So it works in the context of the film where and he gets that much more screen time with Jane. She's helping him trying to achieve his goals, and that's what stories are all about. Our characters going after goals. So and then while helping him achieve his goal, they have some dialogue, not too much. And then it's only after the hammer is after he doesn't realize he can pick up the hammer that then he has his encounter with Loki. We've been flashing back and forth to Asgard, and Odin. Loki realized his true origins. Odin fell into the Odin sleep. Loki's temporary king, acting king, and then he comes down and tells him father's dead. People say that's when Thor actually goes through whatever change he goes through. So we literally just have this. I'm gonna goof off with Jane Foster for a couple minutes, go try and have an action scene to pick up my hammer, can't pick up my hammer, and then the thing that's gonna make me change is this just being told that my father's dead, and that makes me think it's all my fault and everything. But it still kind of works. I mean, it's an action movie, so we had to have the action scene, and then we see what transpires to make him change. Where the film has gotten its most criticism, and what I would give its most criticism, is that then the third act is when the Loki or when the Warriors three decide, well, we don't want Loki as king, we just don't. So let's go to Earth and let's let's get Thor, and he realizes his father's still alive, and so Loki, realizing the Warriors three have left, sends the destroyer, and there's an action scene. And I just and it's the day after. So after Thor goes through his change, he has a nice heartwarming scene. He goes and has some drinks with Selvig, and then has a nice heartwarming scene of dialogue with Jane on the roof, and that all works. It does. But then everything that happens next happens the next day, and then he goes back to and then he proves himself the hero. He goes back to Asgard, kicks Loki's Asgard, and then the end. He can't get back to Earth, but the whole romance with Jane was that one night, and it was that one magical night. No, but it doesn't really work, and everyone says that, and even Kenneth Branagh admitted to that in the commentary, where he played it off as this is just the beginning of a romance. This is not the grand passions. He kept saying that these are not the grand passions. This is the beginning of an attraction, but that's what we're telling in this story. And like I said, my point here is to point out where things went wrong and how they could have done better. And I can see why the writers felt that they were in a trap, because they have this story that has to go at a certain pace in the war. Loki becomes king. The Warriors three leave. They come to Earth. All that has to happen in a certain time frame. Which is cut back and forth between Thor going on the search for his hammer and having everything happen to him, and it's just after his father's death that or his father's apparent death that lost my train of thought there. But point is, I can see why they thought that, but they were wrong. There's a huge opportunity here for a time lapse. Okay, after Thor goes through his change, right, that night, they could have flashed forward like just several weeks, and we could have seen how Thor um, has changed and how he's humbling himself, and he's working at the diner. Here's the Prince of Asgard working at the diner, like one of those guys from the earlier in the movie that he was rude to comes in. He's like, "I got your usual, Ed," and Jane sort of humbled him, and that's what he likes about Jane. Maybe some people think they didn't have any chemistry to begin with. I thought they did. I read the undertones, right? If you didn't pick up on them, and maybe I'm just making this up in my mind, but the way I perceived it was that Thor is immediately attracted to her because she is someone who has the mind of a warrior. She's very fierce, but she's a scientist, and not that Thor's never met a scientist before, but Jane has a unique personality where she has all the traits of a warrior like Sif, but she, chooses to pursue a career of knowledge, and I just think that worked. And we could have flashed forward a couple weeks and actually we've seen everything. Yes, all the character development basically still happens in that one bulk of time, that one day or two. Okay, but just having that extra little, let's stitch this on, that there was an extra few weeks there, it just makes it work better. Because yes, we see why they're attracted to each other in that day or two, but by saying that it's been several weeks, we can actually believe that more, that it's solidified, and his change has solidified. It's not just I spent a day on Earth and now I'm, and now I'm changed man. Now you might be thinking, but how do you deal with the fact that what's going on in Asgard is still very finite? It has to happen at a certain pace, but it doesn't have to happen at a certain pace. You'll notice that after Thor, basically after Thor is banished and after Odin falls into the Odin sleep, Loki basically goes to Jotunheim and is like, "I'll make a deal with you," and then basically the Warriors 3 at that same moment decide that they're going to leave Asgard because Loki's king. So what if it was a few weeks and they're saying, "Well, Loki's doing bad stuff. We don't like it. We're more suspicious than ever." There's no reason why you couldn't have done that. There's also no reason why you couldn't have staggered the scenes cutting back to Asgard a little differently so that they end up so a lot of that stuff ends up happening later, like some of the scenes after Odin falls into the Odin sleep. There's a couple of scenes there that could have just happened later. So I feel like it was a missed opportunity, and that's the biggest flaw of the movie. It feels like it had a lot of potential, but it just relegates everything into one day, and it doesn't work that way. But at the same time, you have a cool adventure movie with a great score. I love the moment when he gets his hammer back and that Patrick Doyle Thor theme plays. Everything just looks great. He goes back up to Asgard and, has this big fight with his brother. I mean, maybe Loki's plan doesn't make any sense. I'm going to prove to Father I'm the worthy son by committing genocide. But he's also crazy. That's kind of what I got. He's just sort of nuts. So that's what I think about Thor. Biggest problem is the, abbreviated time he has with Jane, which could have been expanded. I know the actress who plays the waitress is actually Adriana Barraza, who's an Academy Award nominated actress. So she was actually originally cast in a bigger role. There are deleted scenes I've never seen on the DVD. So if they're out there, I'd like to see them because there's more footage that they had. So I'd like to see that. But that's my thoughts on Thor. I'll be back with my thoughts on Captain America: The First Avenger. Thanks, guys.